Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia. This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hello and welcome to a very special guest episode of the 16 to 1 podcast. This week we're feeling lucky we get to have a conversation with Dr. Jim Mahoney on the subject of educational leadership. Jim Mahoney is a longtime educator and entrepreneur. He's dedicated his life to bettering educational opportunities for all students, serving as a superintendent, principal, and teacher, as well as an adjunct professor at several Ohio universities. In 2001, he joined Battelle for Kids as the organization's first executive director. Under Jim's 15 years of leadership, Battelle for Kids grew into a national not-for-profit that expanded across the globe to advance educational equity and opportunity for all students. And I have a personal connection to Battelle for Kids. I got to complete an internship there when I was in college, during the time when Jim was at the helm. Today, Jim serves as the founder of Red Brick Hill, a leadership consulting organization, as well as the Strengths Center, comprised of former educators and strengths-based leadership experts who are passionate about creating positive cultures, both in schools and organizations. In addition to writing several articles and co-authoring books, Jim is the author of the book To Lead is to Teach: Stories and Strategies from the Classroom to the Boardroom. Jim has made presentations throughout the United States, Canada, Ireland, and China, and has been recognized on numerous occasions for his leadership in education. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Jim. We've been looking forward to having you for quite a while. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm happy to share some ideas that might provoke other conversations or other views, because it's an enduring part of the education of young people when we talk about
Absolutely.
leadership. So it's a great conversation.
Great. And I know, Katie, you've also had some professional overlap with Jim.
Yeah, I teach at the school district where Jim spent a lot of his career, and I've been lucky to get to have Jim speak at my professional development. He's like my favorite guy to come in, so I'm always happy to hear from Jim Mahoney. It's like the highlight of every professional development at John Glenn High School, so
Thank you.
I'm excited.
I still get to work. First of all, I'm going to start with, it was this fall, 50 years ago, that I met my first group of sixth graders, seventh and eighth graders.
Wow.
So this is my 51st year. So if I take the most important job I ever had, which was teaching, here I am in my 51st campaign, and I have a class at OU, I have a class at Dublin, and I still like being in a classroom with young people and figuring out how we can learn together. So I still get to do that, and it is a privilege and an honor to do that. The other things that I do in terms of, in addition to working at Ohio University, I still work with a group of superintendents in an organization called the Strengths Center, and we do lots of strength work with various entities. When I say strength work, we're using the Gallup Strength Finder as an assessment tool, and then discovering, using your own strengths. And then I do a fair amount of workshops on various topics. Here's one that most people would never guess, but it's been an honor to do this. I am on the faculty of the Police Executive League, and those are senior police officers who cohorts meet 3 times a year, different groups, and I get to do a leadership piece for them for a couple of days, and it's called the Executive Group from the Academy. So that's been a fun thing. So I'm getting to do lots of things that I want to do, but at the heart of it, it's teaching. At the heart of it, it's teaching and learning, and that has not changed for me ever.
I don't know if you know this, but you have some big fans of the strengths assessment here. We have a friend group. Most of my friends from Maryland, one of them is a corporate trainer, leadership trainer, and he's very interested in the strengths test, and everyone in the group has taken the strengths tests, and we actively discuss our results a lot, and we think about what it means to have a group that is made up of, people who have these different
I'm meeting with a group of about 35 school superintendents from Northeast Ohio in the morning, and they've all taken the assessment. So what we'll spend at length is understanding yourself, because it doesn't matter how old you get or what your experiences are. Leadership in part is to understand yourself and your leadership, and then building teams not around you, but with you, and knowing what their strengths are. And it's a tool to improve engagement, because where people are engaged at work or at school, they're interested, they're into the moment, if you will, and their productivity is higher. Engagement is a proxy for less absenteeism, more productivity, all those things. And strengths it's a tool. It's not a panacea, but it is one tool. And I'm always amazed. It's funny, last night in my class at OU, that's what we did. Because as I said, then we're going to talk about the most important person in your life, and that's you. Don't be a passenger in your own life. And part of it is understanding who you are and the gifts you have and how to make the highest and best use of you. And I think good leaders do that. They're thinking and they're honest with themselves, and they create the kind of environment that other people can be honest with them, and they know what's the highest and best use of them. And then you're trying to figure out what's the highest and best use of other people that I work with. And together, what can we do collectively that would be much more impactful than any one of us could do individually? And it's really bringing life to that and doing it.
I'll just dive right in and put you on the spot and ask the two big questions right away. And the first is, what does leadership mean to you, broadly speaking? And then if there's anything specific that you've learned that makes for effective educational leadership within that realm. I don't know that there is anything that is special to, either the classroom or a school or anything like that when it comes to leadership.
I think, first of all, it was interesting. Somebody asked me last night on the break, they talked about, what if you really don't want to be a leader? And I said, well, what do you think a leader is? And we talked about that, because to me, leadership is a verb, and that you can exhibit that anywhere and at any level, because there is no effective leadership without followership. And followership includes your personal leadership. When I think about it, it's very much a verb. It's action oriented, that you see something that you want to improve, and collecting the other people, yourself, to make those changes. But it's seeing what could be and exercising your influence, whatever that is. Over time, if I had to do a formal definition, there's so many definitions, but the one I always liked the best was, leaders are those people who are able to create a vision with others, articulate that vision, and then enroll subscribers so that there's somebody following and somebody else who believes in that collective vision. It's not a sole vision. It's one that we think about, if we were really operating on all cylinders, what would this place be like? And what can we do to make it like that? And to use the gifts, because nobody wants to be in a band where the leader gets all the solos. This is not an I sport. This is a team sport when it's done well. But it starts with a sense of, usually there's something we want to fix. We want to improve. We want to be better. I often say the biggest room in any organization is the room for improvement. And if you don't have a room for improvement, then I guess it really doesn't matter whether you have any leadership either. I've never met an organization that didn't have room for what that improvement looks like, and then how you get people organized to do it, and the context, all that matters. But at the end, it is about doing something, improving something, because you see a need, you see something that could be better.
And this is really interesting because since I've been at John Glenn, 11 years, I've had a few changes in leadership over this time. So it's been interesting to watch it change and flow over time, and the little things become big things, and the big things aren't as big as they used to be or feel like, or something like that. So I would be interested to hear your perspective on, what type of leadership do you think is the most useful for teachers? Because I have an answer in my head, but I want to know what you think it is.
First of all, the context matters. There are certain things that, for me, are values. And that is, I always want teacher voice. I always want people who are doing this work every day and enlisted in how we might do it better. It's less telling and more collecting and gathering, but then moving forward with that. But the context does matter. For example, I think for school leaders, and you lived through this, coming out of the pandemic required perhaps some different things, particularly for superintendents, that it's still going on. The cultural ideologies, depending upon where you are, it can be very different and what's impacting you. And I saw this in Virginia just last month. There was a superintendent there, a new superintendent, in a fairly large district, and I'm going to say close to Loudoun County, which is the epicenter of part of the cultural war that occurred and is occurring in Virginia. And one of the things I thought he did such a wonderful job of threading the needle with his staff, he said, I need to tell you whose side I'm on. I'm on student side. And I hope that's what side you're on. And don't let people drag you into taking positions that they can then use. Let's just remain student focused. So I guess my point here is with the kind of leadership, I can't imagine any circumstances where I wouldn't want teacher voice in helping to direct and create the conditions for learning and improving practices, but it has to start with them. It's not I just have never been a doing to people. It's a doing with. So the preposition you use there matters. And then you figure out what are some good ways to do that and build that into the system. So that one is still important because the people closest to the action know the action. And I got to believe that's not only true with teaching, that's true with any industry. That someone once said that there's an inverse relationship between your distance from the problem and the solution, meaning that it gets a lot easier if you don't have to ever deal with it. And it looks easier. And the closer you get to the action, the more it requires thoughtfulness. But mostly is if I want people's hearts and minds, they want to solve problems. Brene Brown, lots of people write about vulnerability. And it's not a weakness for a leader to say, look, I'm not sure what the best approach here. So it's vulnerable. And people are more likely to be enlisted from somebody who's vulnerable. And that's not a weakness when somebody says that, as opposed to always being sure and wrong. So you want somebody with confidence as you move forward, but I like the vulnerability to enlist other people's opinions too.
I'm really interested in that problem. What I'm hearing a lot from not just school leaders, but also community leaders, public leaders, civic leaders, I'm hearing that there's, in general, maybe not a breakdown in communication, but I think we need to evolve new forms of communication in the kind of landscape that we have where everybody is shouting very loudly for your attention. And I'm really interested in the relationship between teachers and school leaders and of other kinds and the relationship between those people and the communities in which their institutions exist. I would love to know what you've learned about effective communication strategies when it comes to getting that kind of buy-in that you're talking about.
This is hard work. And there's lots of dialogue. What I've learned with whatever the group is, people are down on what they're not up on. And again, it's easier to bring people into it. Parents certainly want to know and want to be enlisted in how the school can best help their kids. Parents will always be kids' first and most important teachers. So we want to include them. Oftentimes you'll see portrait of a graduate or portrait of a learner so that we have some agreed upon, here's what we're working towards. So when your kids graduate from here, here are the kind of skills we want them to have. Here are the dispositions we hope we fostered, and we want your help in doing that. And we collectively gather lots of information. I'll give you one that happened at John Glenn High School. I will never forget. If I were to list all the things ever, we had a meeting there one Saturday morning, and we had spent months planning for this meeting and encouraging people to be there. So we had a couple hundred people there from throughout the community. And we were faced with two issues. We were faced with an operating issue, and we were faced with a facility issue. Two different issues. And the board, to their credit, wanted to have this meeting. They didn't say, well, we got elected, so let's decide how we're going to do this, because this could go a lot of ways. And I remember some people asked me, so why are you doing this? I said, because I want to know what people really think. We're going to provide them with really good information. So I had 2 or 3 just outstanding people there who were great communicators to be able to communicate pieces and answer questions. They said, well, you have people at 20 tables. What if 6 of them want that, 7 of them want this, 6 of them want that? I said, that's okay. I would rather know that up front than to hear about it in the parking lot. Whatever they think, they're going to think. I would just assume they think it right there, and we'll get a sense of what it is, what we're going to have to deal with, and we're getting an early indicator. And this was before the board had decided whether to place what kind of issue or issues on the ballot. And I'll tell you, it came out in a way I never would have predicted. And because of that meeting, I never want to presume what a group of people, when given information, might decide. And it was at that meeting, it was almost unanimous. The more they talked and as people shared things, they said, look, let's take care of this facility issue. Let's do a permanent improvement levy for 5 years so we pay less interest over time. And they recommended that there be 2 issues. They reached 4 mills. That was 8 mills. That's a lot of new millage. But I have to tell you what, when I left that meeting, I felt better about it. I said, look, I think this is the direction the board will go, because it was so clear. The board met, did that, and it passed. I mean, I still have the newspaper that says East levies pass, all others fail. That levy was passed through those engagement sessions. And it wasn't just that one session, there were lots of engagement sessions. So people are in on it. And I think if you want to make lasting moves that become sustainable moves, you enlist people. Because if you want to make quick moves, you can do that, but they often aren't sustainable, because suddenly there'll be another group. Well, did you think about this? And what about that? And then you get into the fights of things. So part of leadership is not only communicating, asking, reaching out to lots of different groups. And they can be different and have different views. They're still going to have them. You might as well know, so that you have all the cards, if you will, on the table before, if you have to make some major decisions.
Yeah, we just did an episode on teaching history and how the ways in which we have conversation about history can sometimes make us unaware of other lenses or other points of view. Right. And I think what you're talking about here is, like, especially as a leader within an educational system, the not knowing what other points of view are out there or available. It's a difficult challenge, because you're attempting to meet all of those unspoken needs.
Right. And you're giving people the space, a safe space with which to do it. And the more you can do that, the better. Because oftentimes it's not that you have to agree, but people need to have a safe space to be able to disagree. I think that's really important. And I think good leaders do that. You get the sense that people are feeling part of something that's bigger than them, and they have a voice, and that how the school system, we are what you want us to be. And a good leader is the one who's helping them to arrive at that, and not always the person who's out in front leading the charge. You need to follow them. That isn't true. They're helping to create the environment. I often tell the story about the warmest recorded temperature on Earth was at Death Valley, California, 135 degrees. And that's several decades ago. It almost reached it this summer. But one of the things that happened there in 2004, they began to get water, rainfall. They usually get a quarter to a half inch a year. But in the fall of 2004, early winter of 2005, they got about 6 inches of rain. And that spring, suddenly there's wildflowers everywhere. It's never happened since. And it's a reminder that under the right conditions, anybody or anything can flourish. And I think leaders are the condition setting folks. They're creating the conditions to allow others to flourish. It's just not a solo piece. And that's part of it. You can find books on these mythical heroes, and we want them to be bigger. Right now in the sports world, I don't know if you like sports, you're paying any attention to this. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. And it's interesting. I don't know how he's going to end up doing this year, but I will tell you, he has turned things upside down. He's put in lots of systems. It's not just about his charisma. He has that, and he's able to articulate it, and he got it started. But if that's all you ever see, you have missed the whole supporting cast he's brought in, the systems that he's put in place for his players. He's aligning his expectations with behavior. He walks the talk. So there's a whole bunch of things. If you're in that leadership role to be effective, there's a lot of moving parts, and it's exhausting. It is exhausting.
Yeah, I'm always in the sports. I actually, when we sent over these notes, I had originally put at the bottom that I wanted to ask you what you thought about the Reds this season, because I remember you telling this story about going to training camp, and I was wondering what you thought of Ellie.
The Reds are like a team with all new teachers. Can you be effective with all new teachers? Yes, you can.
You're exactly right.
And they have veterans.
Yep. And then they got Joey
And they have
Votto.
one veteran there. But, it comes back to, again, it's about teaching, learning, improving, giving feedback, getting better. There's just a whole continuous cycle of improvement.
For sure.
No matter what organization you're in.
Yeah.
And they're doing that there, and they've been fun to watch.
They have been. My dad is a Reds fan, so I've been happy for him. I'm a Yankees fan, so I'm not having much fun this year.
There's still a good chance for the wild card, so we'll see.
I hope so. And you guys just got Harrison Bader from the Yankees, and I liked him too. He's a young one. He's pretty fun. So anyways, now I just want to talk about sports.
I'll tell you the one that I think has incredible impact is going to be artificial intelligence. I can't tell you all the impact, but I know if I were somewhere, I'd have a group, and we would be into this. For some people, I just hear they're like the people that look at the donut and only see the hole. Oh, kids will plagiarize. This will be like going to the encyclopedia, and you don't even have to copy it anymore. It'll copy it for you. And are there some implications that are a downside? Yes, but I keep thinking of what might be all the possibilities that this could offer to improving teaching and learning. So I think this is a new technology. And I think as we get better and smarter and more useful in this, that the idea that we're going to contain this, the toothpaste is long out of the tube on this. We're going to find out, well, what are some appropriate uses? So that's one I really think has an impact. I think that choice is going to continue to have an impact. I'm a big believer in public education. But what I don't think is that others ought not to exist. And I never wanted to waste my time fighting about charters, et cetera, et cetera. My obligation is to do what I can to make public education the best choice, because I know that for many poor and disenfranchised kids, this is going to be their place. And I want to make it a great place. And I'm not going to let the existence of others take away from our responsibility to do right by the kids we have. But I do think choice is going to impact that, because you're going to have so many resources that are spread across so many different ones now. And with the increase in voucher programs, and are we going to create different bureaucracies? I read about and understand some of this started during the pandemic, where they would create I'm not going to call it a school, but a learning pod of 5 to 7 kids. And that becomes their school. So one size doesn't fit all. I think all those are exciting. So that space between teachers and kids, I can't imagine that's not always going to be timeless. But how and where that takes place and under the conditions. Look, I'm so old, I can remember we went to evening conferences for parents. There were people who objected to it. It's like, well, why would we have them in the evening? We don't go to the dentist in the evening. Well, you do now, the good ones. You just think about some of these changes that seem to be, oh my goodness. But I think you're always looking for ways. One of the things we did at Battelle for Kids that really was a catalyst, we, with the help of several researchers on staff, identified some of the highest performing systems in the world. And then we organized trips for not only our staff, but all kinds of people for whom we could do that, and they could join us and pay their way. And so we sent groups to Ontario and Singapore and Finland and Long Beach, California. But then they came back and they were just sharing ideas left and right. And it isn't because, well, Sweden does this, Finland does this, so we should do this. Finland does that because it fits within their context. But you can understand the ideas. And it was the idea sharing that was so powerful. I guess I'm still the belief that if you want a good idea, you need lots of ideas. And they can come from lots of sources. I'm rambling around here, but I have this T-shirt saying. I worked with a guy, his name's Tom Suttis. He's deceased now. He was the Entrepreneur of the Year in the early 80s. He was the development director at Notre Dame for a decade. He was the boxing coach at Notre Dame for 40 years. And I got to know him really, really well. And he was just the most entrepreneurial person I ever met with incredible people skills. He gave me this T-shirt that I still wear. And it said, think big, start small, act now. And that was sort of his mantra for entrepreneurial activity, but it kind of fits with a lot of things. It's like, we are going to start somewhere here, folks.
As you were talking about sort of chipping away at big problems, I was wondering how that question might be brought to bear on certain challenges that are facing rural districts, especially around here right now. Declining enrollments, what that means for class sizes, what that means for staffing. I almost see a pattern where that problem gets treated as this monolithic, unapproachable thing, because it's like it's coming whether we like it or not. There's kind of nothing to do about it. A kind of fatalism about that particular problem that I see a lot. But I'm not sure how I would break it down to make it so that people can start to approach it like any of these other challenges of leadership that we've talked about.
This is truly flying by the seat of my pants. But as I think about this, the question is, what can we do better together than we could do ourselves? And you have to take some things off the table for people to argue about. Governance needs to be taken off the table because there is a sense, particularly in rural areas, of local control. And I'm not going to try to remove local control. What I do want to do is, how can we increase opportunities? And now I'm going to come back to technology, a variety of other tools. Are there some ways that we could all benefit in the larger rural community without giving up our individual identities too? Because those are so important to people. But we don't want kids to lose opportunities because we don't have numbers. It's easier to describe than it is to do. An undersecretary of education years ago, I think his name was Cecil Underwood, who said, and I really believe, that there's probably not a problem in the world somebody's facing that somebody doesn't have some partial solutions for somewhere else. Finding what some of those are and then beginning to experiment. Say, well, let's try this with a small group. We do not have to turn the whole system upside down. Now, there's sometimes the cart's in the ditch and you just need to turn something upside down. If we're losing enrollment and then people start worrying about school closures and what about my local school, etc., I go back to, what is it we want our kids to be able to do? Are there some other ways that we might do this? Because otherwise it will just happen, and it just happens de facto. And we keep solving this. We think that problems are solved in linear fashion. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's this gigantic breakthrough of seeing something in a way we never saw it before and trying it. I mean, obviously there's no simple solution to that, and it's real. But I guess I always come back to opportunities. I look in suburban schools and I look at some of the opportunities kids get, and it's just unbelievable. They're just terrific. And I think, do kids in rural areas get the same? No, they don't. And those gaps have widened significantly over the last several decades. So part of it becomes, well, is there a way we can share in this in the largesse of a larger group? And part of what's happened is in rural areas, people just, circle up and then shoot in instead of circling up to figure out how we might take our collective voice and make it stronger and advocate for some things that Could be. Yeah, one of the things, here's one. I don't have an answer for this, but I see it. We keep building school buildings as if school's going to be exactly like it's always been. We keep building them the same way, really. I can remember an instance when a maintenance supervisor said something to me, and he was so right. We laughed. We were at one elementary school, and we're knocking down walls because they want open classrooms, they want flexible grouping, they want flexible furniture, and then in another one, we're building walls. We're putting walls up in the middle of that school that was built like that. And the maintenance person looked at me and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be easier just to trade staffs?" And I laughed, and I thought, really, what he said was brilliant.
That's so smart. It almost
I know
hurts.
it. I know it. I remember when he said it, and I thought, oh my God, there's such a truth to that. I guess I always do come back to the opportunities. I want the kids in rural areas to have more opportunities to figure out who they are and what they might do and how they can use their gifts in their life. And then there's some places that are just resistant. Well, this is how they did school. When I was in school, we have a certain expectation of it. If kids come home learning, excited, happy, I think you can do a lot of things. And if you don't do that, it doesn't matter how you rearrange it. We used to get into these big debates. We work with school districts all over the country in doing some sort of a merit-based pay. It was the idea of incentives, because there are a lot of people who believe that, look, some people get much better results than others, and you ought to pay them more. And if we did that, we'd just be so much better. And I watched some districts get so enamored with the sexiness of differentiated pay when I'd ask, well, what's going to be different for kids? What really will be different for kids here? What we want are student benefits, so that the changes we look at, they have real student benefits, not just perceived benefits. I remember at a number of high schools when they went to the Copernican schedule, the idea that we'll double block. We now have twice as much time to really engage kids, and you can't lecture that long, etc. And it turns out, some people could just lecture that long, or turn the other half into a study hall. That if you're going to anticipate what that additional time is, then you got to support people in doing it differently. And that takes a lot of work. It's not me just telling somebody. So structural changes are not enough. It's very much an inadequate answer to a really difficult problem, but I don't think it's intractable. But I also think it's better to start working on the problem until you have no options.
Do you feel like that with the problems that these leaders are facing, that they're being like well prepared in their higher ed or college, or do you think like those systems are not supporting them in like the changing landscape of what's to come?
I don't know that anybody can prepare you for some of the things that you face. I think the best preparation, it's almost like when you student teach. You got somebody else's kids and somebody else's school, and we've done everything we can to prepare you. But at the end of the day, do I think people are adequately prepared? No, I don't. Schools they do everything they can to prepare leaders. But at the end of the day, when you experience it, that becomes a gigantic teacher. Reality is when it happens to you.
Yes.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, it does, because I feel like, I had a good undergrad. I've gotten my master's in English. I'm in year 11, and there's still days I'm like, this is new. I wasn't prepped on what to do when this happens. So I think you're right. I think the only way they could have prepared you is to throw in like 30 kittens in a room, and like one corner's on fire and one corner. Like there was absolutely no way to prepare anybody for a classroom. So I think you're right. I just wondered if you've seen a shift to try to support, I guess, the flexibility aspect.
Schools do it differently. I'm talking about the institutions of higher ed, but so many things have changed. If I go back, mine's 50 years. And I think, well, what's changed? And what hasn't changed? Well, technology, if you had it, was the overhead projector. The bowling alleys had it first, but schools eventually got them. That was technology. That was pretty much it. And then you think where we arrived at with that. I can remember at East Muskingum Middle School, the first computers were hand-me-downs from NCR. They were gigantic ones. And you see how this has changed everything. That's part of it. but it's how you use those. So, not all change is progress, but there cannot be progress without change. And I don't know that you can ever fully adequately prepare somebody for that, because training teaches you how to respond in specific situations. Teaching is not training, it is thinking. And I guess I always wanted people who were learners. If you're a learner, then you're open to new ways of doing it. You're figuring out, well, somebody has introduced a new idea, they've introduced a new technology, they've introduced a new approach. A learner is open to that. And if they begin to see student benefits, they'll do something with it.
Yeah, I'm super curious about this because in my own experience of higher education that exists for purposes of teacher training or
Right.
teacher education, I can't help but feel that there was an appropriate recognition of some of the challenges facing public schools in this country right now. But even though the problems were accurately identified, the solutions felt very much like trying to retrofit solutions that were for a different context. I know that kind of sounds weird, but it's not even just like old fashioned. It's not exactly that, but the solutions to problems were kind of coming from this top down hierarchical, very traditional way of developing and disseminating the best ideas for educational theory and praxis. And it was concerning to me to be in what is, usually seen to be a rather prestigious school of education and to watch people get stuck in processes like that. And I think that a lot of it did, at least for me, from what I could see, a lot of it seemed to emerge out of a misconception of leadership or a confusion between leadership and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but confusing leadership for something that it's not quite. And it's as much an obligation of the larger fabric of society to be able to figure out those conversations about what leadership should be as it is a school of a higher
Sure.
education institution. But I guess I just worry, especially for our educational leaders, because if we're going to be able to get to the moment where we can see what that's doing, where we can see the long-term effects of those ways of thinking and engaging and bringing in voices or failing to. Yeah, I just kind of remain sort of baffled in the long term
Right.
about that experience that I had. And I'm to this day not been able to fully reconcile
Sure. No, I can tell.
with my
It is
educational
complicated.
journey.
It's interesting. One of the things I do, if I got to be the czar of higher ed for education, instead of a sabbatical every 7 years, you'd have to go back and actually teach all year or be a principal all year. Because I think it would absolutely help your viewpoint with some of these things. Because I used to tease and say nothing's impossible for those who don't have to do the work. So at the end of the day, and then your comments, Chelsea, made me think of years ago when I was a beginning superintendent. I went to a conference, and this name may not mean anything to you. T.H. Bell was there. He was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education. And T.H. Bell was from Utah. He had been a teacher, a school principal, superintendent, college professor. And he said, when I was a school superintendent, I had endless problems and no solutions. And he said, and then I became a college professor and I had endless solutions and no problems. He said it in jest, but the idea of putting people together in such ways that you have to wrestle with it too. Because this is hard. It's hard to teach a craft that you haven't engaged in for a long, long time. And I think having to re-engage in that craft in a substantive way makes sense. So when I say it, I'm criticizing myself as well, because at the end of the day, you have a different feel for it. I will tell you one of the best things that ever happened to John Glenn was, for me personally, me and the middle school principal, Jack Hazard at the time, I think of 96, might have been the first class that had to take the 9th grade proficiency test. And we took them in English and math and science and social studies. And we didn't have a 9th grade civics class. And they were worried that the kids would take this 9th grade social studies. Now, they later let you take it at the end of 8th grade, which was probably a better time. But then it was 9th grade. So they were going to hire a substitute teacher. And some of the English teachers were going to give up English 9 classes to make some time and have sort of a 6-week concentrated civics class that would really get at just the knowledge matter that was the objectives and on that test. So finally said to the principal, I said, I'll tell you what I'd really like to do. I said, high school at the time had 6 periods. And I said, I want to teach the first 3 periods every day. The middle school principal said, I'll take the last 3 periods. And we did that for 6 weeks. And so I taught social studies, 3 periods, 9th graders. I had every 9th grader that year. And it was interesting. They don't know who the superintendent is. They could care less. And, and after a very short term, you were just the teacher and they were the students and you were doing civics. It was a great experience for me after not having done it for a long time on several different vantage points. Because I can remember distinctly thinking how isolated I felt. I knew all the stuff that was going on out there, but I was in these 4 walls, me and a group of kids, and we're trying to make sense of civics. But I guess I always come back to, one of my final points about teaching and leading is good leading is teaching. That is what good leaders do. I always found it interesting that some business leaders would tell me, they wanted their kids to be anything but teachers. And I used to laugh to myself and think, well, if you're any good, that's exactly what you are. You're trying to motivate employees. You're trying to get great results. You're trying to create systems. If you're good at leading something, you're a good teacher. We had a researcher who's written a number of books, Robert Quinn. He's at the University of Michigan, and he wrote lots of books on organizational leadership and effective CEOs, and he wanted to study highly effective teachers. And Chelsea, I don't know if he was there when you were there.
There might have been some overlap,
Okay,
yeah.
He was part of those conversations and part of the research effort. And at the end, he came to me and he said, for a teacher to be effective, they need the same skills as highly effective CEOs that I've written about. He said it's the same skill set. He said it's a different context, but it's the same skill set. And I can remember turning that on him and said, why is it you want to say that to teachers to make them feel good that they could be CEOs? Why don't you turn this on CEOs? If you want to be a good CEO, why don't you be a good teacher?
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of symmetry between those two. I've just never met an effective leader that wasn't a good teacher. And I've never met a good teacher who wasn't an effective leader. I think these do go hand in hand.
You were just talking about research on highly effective teaching, kind of off the cuff. Your favorite data that you get to work with or resources or, what you're digging into right now?
Well, for me right now, I'll tell you what it is. And I would do this if I were the head of an organization. And we did this at Battelle for Kids. I would measure engagement. Engagement matters. And Gallup does this. They do it across the world. They just came out recently with their global workforce report on what percentage of the workforce is engaged in various parts of the country. So in the United States, it's around 31%. So that means we've got 69% that are either engaged or actively disengaged. So measuring engagement and doing those things to increase productivity matters. The other piece that fits with that and why I would do that is Gallup will tell you that their most consistent dynamic finding over the last 80 years has been this. It is if you think about team engagement or think about success of teams. The success of teams, whether or not they're engaged, the variance of a team. Think about a team that they're not engaged at all and to 100%. 70% of that variance as to whether or not they're not engaged or highly engaged is dependent upon one thing. And this is the leader. So leaders find ways to engage people. I've watched people who they only want to look at student outcomes, and now there's a concern with COVID and learning loss, etc. And I understand all that, but I don't think we're ever going to fully capture the full impact of a great teacher, a great school system based solely on test results. That's a piece of information. It's not the sole piece. He probably wasn't there when you were in school when Don McKendry was high school principal. I had to laugh. He would give a little speech to freshman parents. He used to say there are 3 things that are really important. And if your kid does these 3 things, They're going to graduate and be ready for their future to do whatever they want to do. And I told her what they were, and she said, "Oh my God, that's the same thing the principal said there." And I laughed. But, one of them was having kids involved in an extracurricular activity, showing up, attendance. But it wasn't just about an ACT score. I see schools often take credit for high ACT scores or national merit scholars. I'm thinking, really? You really think you're producing a national merit scholar? I think there's a little more to it than just your school system. Yeah, I'm not saying that you didn't contribute, but you know exactly what I mean. So I can remember meeting with a group of parents and saying, if we were really a good school system, what would be the indicators for you? I think it's conversations around that, but I think most people, it isn't just test scores. And we have an Ohio report card. We've changed it countless times, et cetera, et cetera. And there are still legislators who think that drives behavior in schools. It doesn't. And in rural areas, it's almost ignored. If you talk to superintendents, they go, "I've never gotten a phone call about this." They use it for their own. And that's why I thought a lot of the good school systems created their own report cards. And they, once again, engage the parents because that's who their customers are. And the parents and the kids are saying, we want to do right by them. What would doing right by them look like? And that's what we want to do. Because what the General Assembly thinks, what Congress thinks, they are so low in the rankings of groups that are trusted by anybody, it's mattering less and less. I'm going to finish this with one book, which is the longest study in human history in America. The book is called The Good Life, and the author is Robert Waldinger. It came out in February, and the official study is the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And they followed what turned out to be 269 sophomores at Harvard in 1938 over their entire lives. And then they followed another 600 and some kids from 14-year-olds from inner city Boston. And they have now followed them and their kids and their kids. They looked at 10 dimensions. But, what predicted economic flourishing? What predicted good health? What predicted, et cetera, et cetera? The single thing that predicted the power and consistency was relationships. You want a robust life, have relationships. And I can't think of a better profession in the world that enables you to have lots of relationships. I mentioned when I started 50 years ago, what I didn't mention is in June, the first group of kids I had for 3 years. So I had them the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And of those 24 kids, 21 of them showed up for a dinner. And several of them were from different states. So it was almost a surreal experience to sit there with people. It is almost, hurts me to say this, who are 61 years old, 62 years old, and I knew them when they were 11. And we were together for about 6 hours that night. Muskingum had a couple of beginning teachers who came, and they kind of met with kids in groups and gathered some information because it was looking at some things that might have pre-service implications. But I have to tell you what, for the two people who were beginning teachers, they told me it just reaffirmed their wanting to be teachers. And for me, I thought, what a surreal night. How many people get to come together again with people you met 50 years ago? How many would even come? It was about the community they had with each other. It was about the community they had with me. It was about the community they had among their parents. It was a sense of shared experiences that were so powerful, they wanted to reconvene and laugh and share and talk. I don't know that there's a lot of professions that offer you that, and that you never want to forget what the main thing is. It is about building relationships for outcomes, for whatever. The antecedent can be a lot of things, but at the heart of it is relationships. And I never talked to a teacher, frankly, anybody that worked anywhere a very long time who, when it was over, What they missed they didn't miss the hassle. They missed the relationships. For somebody starting now, I'd say, wow, what an exciting time to be a teacher. There's going to be so many innovations that are going to occur. It could be so dramatically different, but that space between teachers and kids remains a sacred space, and you get the privilege of being with kids in their formative years. And it's just special. And I'm using the word kids loosely. I said, I know it was the formative time in your life, but what you all didn't know, it was mine too. And that I was learning as much or more than any one of you about how to do what it is you thought I knew how to do, which of course I didn't.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll let you go now, but this has been so valuable, and I'm glad that we were able to share in this conversation with you. And thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us.
It was a pleasure, and it's like I realized this is 51 years, but when I went to class last night, I was excited. I couldn't wait to see him, and I wanted to try something. And it's still fun. It's still fun.
Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.